Hello everybody, my name is Laura. You're watching the Beanbird 2 channel where we talk about testimonies and the goodness of God. And I want to talk about today when we make a mess out of our lives. And so I've titled it, God, I've Made a Mess. And I'm remembering right away a story of my second born child when he was young, but old enough to know better. I would say maybe 7 years old. He did something where he totally made a big mess. So he was the type of child when he just really liked repetitive things. So he was fascinated with like clocks and watching their mechanisms and watching the wheels and gears turn. He really liked helicopter rotors when he was little. He had a lot of helicopter toys, and he was just fascinated by repetitive motions as a little kid. And he was a good boy, in general. He was always a very well-behaved child. He didn't have any ill intent or anything like that. But one day I went up to take a shower, and when I came downstairs, we had this sofa set that we had spent quite a lot of money on. It was our first piece of real furniture where we bought from a nice furniture store. It was leather, and it was something that we had saved up a long time to buy this furniture set. And it was like a sofa with a love seat and a chair and an ottoman. And it all we purchased in a set with some tax return money. And when I came downstairs, I saw the ottoman of this leather sofa, and it was completely covered with scribble marks from a dry erase marker. And despite the word erase in dry erase, this did not remove from the leather. I tried every cleaner possible. I tried scrubbing it out with various things, and the black marks all over the ottoman just stayed. But what I want to talk about is when I saw the ottoman and I saw the huge mess. Of course, I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? My son immediately took ownership of it, and he was like, I did that. And I was like, why? And he said, I don't know. And it was the way he said it, I believed him. I knew he wasn't doing it to destroy property knowingly. I mean, he did destroy it, but he wasn't thinking I'm going to destroy this. But what I could gather was he made a mark, and then he made another mark, and then he was like, oh, that's neat. And then before he knew it, he got carried away with the whole thing, and he looked back at what he had done, and he was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And knowing that I knew him, I have a relationship with him, I knew him, and so I knew that he didn't have malice behind it. And I felt my heart softened because he took ownership of it. He said that he did it. He admitted it right away. And then when I asked him why, and he said, I don't know. I don't know why I did that. And I 100% believed him. And I thought about how when we mess up and we go to God, right? When we take ownership and we say, God, I messed up, it is so much better for us to do that than to do the other options. Because what my son could have done at this age of 7 is he could have hid. What if he just decided, I'm going to hide? I'll hide under my bed and maybe my mom won't know it's me. If he had done that, I think that my heart would have been hurt, because I would have been thinking, why did he hide from me? I'm not going to hurt him. Why? I would feel, it would hurt me if he felt like he had to hide from me. The other option that he could have done is he could have lied about it, which is something that a lot of kids would have done, is just said it wasn't me, or I don't know anything about it. The third thing he could have done is he could have blamed another sibling and said it was so-and-so, a different person, false testimony. And he didn't do any of those things. And I think about when we do our own confession with God and how he sees us as our children, right? So he has a relationship with us. And so when my son had done this to the ottoman, when I saw the ottoman, I knew his behavior, I knew his thought processes, and I'm just a parent parenting a child. Even more so, God understands us, and right, he knows how we think. He knows what we're thinking, and He knows the path that got us to that point. And sometimes we just make a huge mess of our lives, and we're like, God, help me with this big mess that I've created. And I think that when we just come to Him with them, it's so much better to go to God versus hiding from Him, lying to Him, not praying about it, maybe blaming other people in your life for your own problem that you've created. I really feel like when we come to God, it honors Him more because we're saying, God, I trust you with this. And I know that I don't want to hide from you. And I think about a time in my life when I made a huge mess of my life. My parents had just divorced, and I didn't have anywhere to live. And instead of praying to God about like where I should live or how I should provide for myself during this time where I was leaving the care of my parents, instead I was like, I'm gonna figure this out. And so I decided, and keyword is I decided, that if I lived with my boyfriend, that we could pool our money together. And so that's what I did. And I decided that it would be okay if we kept separate bedrooms because we didn't want to, have inappropriate relationship before we were married. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, and I rationalized that this was okay. But then after a while, I didn't feel okay with it anymore. And then I felt like, well, we have to get married because we live together and it has the appearance of evil. So we should get married. So I decided that. I decided that we should get married. And he followed right along with that. And then when we got married, it turned out to be a disaster because, and I don't want to drag him through the mud, but it didn't work out at all. And it was an epic failure that ended in an annulment. And there I was alone again. And I was faced with the burden of like, how am I going to provide for myself? And that was a testimony where I gave that the Lord had stepped in and answered my prayers. And He provided for me a new job. And through that job, I was able to get housing and a car. But the story continues because I still was walking down that path of I can manage things myself. And I was still creating problems in my life by making my own choices. Like I decided that the apartment that I had wasn't good enough. And so then I decided I was going to buy a house. But I didn't pray about it. And then that house ending up in a short sale around the 2008-2009 housing crisis, and I suffered loss for that property because it was a decision that I made on my own without consulting God because I was going to handle matters into my own hands. And then even when I later got married again when I was 23, and I decided I was going to marry again, and I didn't really consult the Lord about it. And it was really coming off of a period in my life where I was being very rebellious because I blamed God for a lot of things that happened in my life. And I decided that I was going to do it on my own. But the more I tried doing things on my own, the more messed up they became. And then even after my marriage, it was only a few months into it, and my husband had some really big issues that were coming forward, and I just had this colossal mess on my hands again. And I was just living my life going from disaster to disaster to disaster to disaster. And I thought, oh my gosh, by the time I surrendered it all to the Lord, I had made this spaghetti mess of my life. And I thought, I am embarrassed by the way that I look to everyone around me because I look like a complete fool. I've wasted money. I've lost money. I've moved a lot. And I've just went through all these bad seasons. And the thing that was in common was I decided, I know what I'm going to do. And then I would run with it. I know I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to marry this person. I'm going to, do this and that. And I wasn't really leaning on God. I wasn't praying. I wasn't submitted to the Lord. And deep down inside, even though I was a Christian, I was a Christian that was really living in rebellion because deep down inside, I felt like God didn't want what was best for me. I felt like I had to take matters into my own hands. And when I finally surrendered, and I just had this mess, and I was like, there's nothing more I could do with it. And I was like, God, I give up. I'm done. I can't do anything else with this. And if you don't, in fact, if you don't intercede right now, like, my life is a disaster. I'm going to be just a failure at everything. And God intervened at that point, and I really feel like that moment where I came to the end of myself, that was the end of my rebellion season that I went through. And I think that that rebellion season started when I was like, I want to say like 18, and it really went all the way up until, I don't know, it was closer to, gosh, I feel like I was like almost 30 by the time I was really coming around to the other end of that. And so what I'm trying to say is that when I finally gave it all to God, He came through, and it was beyond what I deserved. And here I was thinking I could run from God, thinking I could hide from God. And really, what I should have done from the very beginning was consult God and say, God, what do I do with this? Or, what way can, where would you like me to live? Or where would you like me to work? Or how should I manage these different things in our life? God wants us to have a relationship where we are asking Him, and talking with Him and opening and sharing our hearts. And the thing is, I think sometimes we think God can't handle my real feelings. But the truth is, He already knows our feelings. He already knows what we think. So it would have been better for me to say, Lord, I feel like you've abandoned me. Lord, I feel like you don't have my best interest at heart. Lord, I feel like I have to take matters into my own hands. Help me, Lord. Help me to believe. Help me to trust in your goodness. Help me to have faith in you. Guide me into making wise choices. Lord, give me wisdom. And praying those things would have been way better. And I wish that I had had the response that my son did when he made a mess of that ottoman. I wish I would have just said, God, I don't know what I did. I don't know. But I know that you can fix it. And I know that there's something that God can fix in your life, maybe if you just surrender it. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to do this circuitous route of finding out where the end of us is. But when you can find that place where you're like, I give up, Lord. I want to give it all to you. Don't hide from Him. Don't lie about it. Don't try to conceal it. He already knows. So sometimes I find if there's a time when I've done something that I feel guilty about, I find it hard to pray. And I'm sure you've been there before, right? Maybe you had some sort of failing where you messed up, and then you're like, ugh, I can't pray now. I mean, geez, God, how can I pray to God when I just did this thing, A lot of times people feel this way about sexual sin, right? They fail in some way, and then they feel like they have to hide for a number of days before they're okay again to come to God in prayer, and kind of slink back into the prayer room and be like, oh God, it's been 3 days. I think I can pray again because, I messed up a couple days ago. But really, if we can just run to Him immediately, and I've found great success with that. I find if there's something that I failed in, I want to go to God as soon as I can in prayer and say, Lord, I disagree with this thing that I did. It was wrong. I acknowledge it. I want your blood to wash me clean. I accept your sacrifice, and move on. Because the enemy thrives when he can create that distance between us and God, when he can shame us into saying, look, you can't talk to God today. Maybe tomorrow you can pray. Give Him some time to cool off. God doesn't need time to cool off. He already knows what you did. He knew what you did when He was on the cross. And so it's not a surprise to Him, because He paid that price for that sin back then, 2,000 years ago. And so there's nothing that we can surprise Him with. And I think a lot of times I see it in my kids, they'll have something that they did or that they're ashamed of. And when you're an adult looking back, you can remember when you were a kid and you made those same mistakes, or when you were a kid and you failed in the same ways, and it's not a surprise to you because you kind of just know, like, oh, I remember doing that when I was little. And even more so, immeasurably more, God knows us. He knows our patterns. He knows our ways. He knows our weaknesses. And I think the biggest thing we can do is not create that distance when we fall short. If we fall short, just go to him immediately and be like, God, I had a bad dream. God, I messed up. God, I lost my temper. And just put it out there. And then you take away the window of opportunity that the enemy has to grab a foothold into your life and to create shame and grow this idea in your mind that you don't deserve to have a relationship with God, because that's not true. Because God loves us. He makes it so that we can be with him. And so because of Jesus and the penalty's been paid, we have every right to come to the Lord in prayer. And don't let shame hinder you today. And I hope that story helps. And if you leave a comment, I would love to hear where you're listening from. I found that very interesting. The past few days, I've heard people say what country that they're listening from, and I love hearing that. And I love hearing when people have been impacted by the messages. So stay well, and I will see you tomorrow.